Ask 10 people on the street to explain the difference between a democracy, a republic, and capitalism. You'll get 10 completely different answers, most of them wrong. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some of the most heated political arguments happening right now, in living rooms and on social media, and in parliaments around the world, are arguments between people who are actually agreeing with each other. They just don't know it, because they're using words they were never properly taught. Welcome to Tiny But Wise, where we take the small things you ignore every day and reveal the big truths hiding inside them. Today we're cracking open 3 of the most used, most misused, and most misunderstood words in modern political life. Democracy, republic, capitalism. 3 words that get thrown around every single day by politicians, journalists, teachers, and ordinary people, often incorrectly, often interchangeably, and almost always without anyone stopping to ask what they actually mean. Before we untangle this, I want you to sit with a few uncomfortable questions. Have you ever confidently used one of these words in an argument and then privately wondered if you had it exactly right? Have you ever heard someone say, "America is not a democracy, it's a republic," and had absolutely no idea how to respond, or even if they were correct? And here's the one that should really make you think. Is it possible that the reason these words confuse so many people isn't because the concepts are difficult, but because keeping people confused about them is actually useful to someone? Let's start with the oldest of the 3. Democracy. The word comes from ancient Greek, demos meaning people, and kratos meaning power or rule. People power. Rule by the people. Simple enough on the surface. But here's where the first confusion begins. When the ancient Athenians invented democracy around 500 BCE, they meant something very specific and very literal. Every eligible citizen, and yes, it was only free men at the time, which is its own important conversation, gathered in a public space and voted directly on every law, every decision, every policy. No representatives. No elected officials making decisions on your behalf. You showed up, you raised your hand, your vote counted directly. This is called direct democracy. Now think about how any modern country actually works. When Americans vote, they don't vote on laws. They vote for people who then vote on laws. When British citizens vote, same thing. When Indians vote in the world's largest democratic election, over 900 million eligible voters, they are choosing representatives, not directly deciding policy. This system has a specific name, representative democracy, or sometimes called indirect democracy. The people hold the power in theory, but they exercise it by choosing someone to act on their behalf rather than acting directly themselves. And this is exactly where the word republic enters the room. A republic, from the Latin residential publica, meaning public thing or public affair, is a system of government where power belongs to the people and is exercised through elected representatives, usually operating under some form of constitution or rule of law. The moment you heard that definition, something should have clicked. Because it sounds almost identical to representative democracy, doesn't it? And that's because in modern usage, they largely overlap. Almost every modern democracy is also a republic. Almost every modern republic calls itself a democracy. The 2 words are not opposites. They are not in competition. They describe different aspects of the same system. So why do people treat them like they're mutually exclusive? Why does someone at a dinner table confidently say, "Actually, we're a republic, not a democracy," as if they've just won an argument? Here's the truth. The distinction that person is usually trying to make, whether they know it or not, is between pure direct democracy and representative constitutional government. They're saying, we don't rule by pure mob vote, we have laws and structures that protect individual rights even when the majority disagrees. And that's a completely valid and important point. But calling that a republic versus a democracy is like saying a tomato is a fruit versus a vegetable. Technically, one framing is more precise, but in everyday usage, both are talking about the same tomato. The real protection against majority rule, trampling minority rights, isn't the word republic. It's the Constitution. It's the independent judiciary. It's the Bill of Rights. Those are the actual mechanisms. The label is almost secondary. Now, capitalism. And this is where the confusion goes from interesting to genuinely important. Because here's the thing that trips everyone up. Capitalism is not a form of government. At all. Democracy and republic describe how political power is organized and exercised. Capitalism describes how an economy is organized. These are completely different categories. Mixing them up is like confusing the rules of a football game with the color of the jerseys. One tells you how the game is played. The other is a separate feature that can change without changing the game. Capitalism, at its core, means that the means of production, factories, businesses, land, resources, are privately owned rather than owned by the government or the community collectively. Prices are set by markets, meaning by the interaction of supply and demand rather than by government decree. Profit is the engine. Private ownership is the foundation. That's it. That's capitalism in its basic form. And here's where minds get blown. You can have capitalism without democracy and democracy without capitalism, because one runs your government and the other runs your wallet. They are completely separate systems, and nobody ever told you that. You can also have democracy without capitalism. Some Nordic countries have highly democratic political systems, but also have large public sectors, strong government ownership of key industries, and heavily regulated markets. They're democratic. They're not purely capitalist. And then there's socialism, another word that gets tangled into this mess, which is an economic system, just like capitalism, where the means of production are owned collectively or by the state rather than by private individuals. Socialism is an economic label. Democracy is a political label. You can have democratic socialism, which is what Bernie Sanders talks about, or you can have authoritarian socialism, which is what the Soviet Union practiced. The political and economic systems are separate tracks. So why does everyone mix these up so consistently and so confidently? Here's the twist. It's partly historical, partly intentional, and partly just human nature. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union weren't just fighting a military and political battle. They were fighting a battle of ideas. And in that battle, the framing got hardwired into culture. America was both democratic and capitalist. The Soviet Union was both communist and authoritarian, so generations grew up believing these pairings were natural law rather than political accident. And if you're wondering whether some of that confusion was deliberately cultivated, the answer is almost certainly yes, on all sides. Governments and political movements throughout history have benefited from voters who don't clearly understand the difference between an economic system and a political one. Because if you can convince people that capitalism and democracy are the same thing, then criticizing capitalism feels like an attack on democracy. And if you can convince people that socialism and authoritarianism are the same thing, then supporting social programs feels like supporting dictatorship. These are rhetorical weapons, and they only work on people who haven't learned the basic definitions. Here is the most powerful insight to take from all of this. Democracy describes who holds power. Republic describes how that power is structured and constrained. Capitalism describes how wealth and production are organized. 3 different answers to 3 completely different questions. A country can choose any combination of these independently. And understanding that, truly understanding that, makes you immune to an enormous amount of political manipulation. Because the moment you can separate these ideas clearly in your own mind, you can evaluate them separately. You can support one without automatically supporting another. You can criticize one without being accused of attacking the others. That is exactly the kind of clear thinking that is very inconvenient for people who want your vote, your fear, or your outrage. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If most political confusion comes from mixing up these 3 categories, what other important words do you think we've been using wrong without even realizing it? If you found this video valuable and learned something new, do us a favor, like subscribe to Tiny But Wise and share it with your loved ones. Now your turn. Drop a comment with the next topic. We read every comment, and the best suggestion gets a shout out. See you there.